Welcome, everybody, to Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate, a journey of emotional resilience. I'm your host, Brandon, and coming at you with another journey segment today. I'm really excited because I think this is a really awesome perspective to share and a really awesome journey to experience and see it from a different point of view from than just like what I see today about narcissism and everything like that. So I'm really excited and I'm really grateful that Kylee was more than willing to join us to share their experience and how they have experienced it and then started that healing journey through it. So Kylee, welcome to the show. And again, I appreciate you coming on and doing this.
Thank you.
Yeah, so just kind of like to start us off and jump into it, where do you see the importance in sharing, your experiences, whether that's going through it or on your healing journey as well?
So the word narcissist is thrown around so much these days. You ask anyone about their dating history and they probably have a narcissistic ex because that's the buzzword. That's the fad word of nowadays. And a lot of people don't even know what a narcissist even is. And it's an actual personality disorder. And many people don't even know that. And when I first got my diagnosis, I decided to look for resources online and I could not find any. It was all for the victims. It was all about the red flags of the narcissist and how to avoid them and how to grieve from one. And it was like, what about the people that are actually trying to get help and who have MPD and who want to heal? And I couldn't find that. And I was like, you know what? This is such a demonized and stigmatized disorder, and I am in therapy and I am actively trying to get better. So might as well document it online to show people that it is possible to heal and recover, and also to help hold myself accountable. And so that's why I make the videos that I do.
Yeah, and I'm going to put your links in the description. So anybody interested in going to check Kylee out, definitely, go check out the videos. They really drew me in, and so that's why I'm really thankful to have you on to share that. And I'm just curious because you see that perspective, and I love that you said the dating history thing because that's really all I see about it. How many people would you say were actually accused of narcissism, but actually narcissistic?
Probably not many. Narcissism looks like so many other disorders, and people are not psychologists. You can't armchair diagnose someone with a severe complex disorder. It's caused by trauma, and about 1% of the population actually has MPD. That's very, very, very low. Not many people actually have the disorder. It's rare. So for everyone be calling them like their ex a narcissist or their boss a narcissist or their relative one, no. It's just the buzzword nowadays for a toxic person.
Yeah, no, and I love that perspective, and I think it's really powerful, especially when it comes to a disorder like that, to like hear it from somebody who's actually experiencing it, and that's where like true education happens, and that learning of what it is or what it looks like, really comes into play. So I'm excited to get into that with you, and like when it comes to your diagnosis, when were you diagnosed, and then just kind of was there some like signs or things you felt beforehand that like you had thought about or you felt different about or just like change your experience growing up?
So I was diagnosed rather recently. It was January of this year, but all my life I was told that I was cruel, manipulative, cold, heartless, that I was mean to people. And I never understood why I felt the satisfaction of being mean to others, of purposely having these power dynamics with people, of being so jealous, of feeling like everything was a competition. I just didn't understand what was happening. And I went to psych after psych after psych, and no one was giving me any answers. And I was like, I don't know, something's wrong with me. And then in 2020, I got diagnosed with a different personality disorder, borderline personality disorder. And shortly after, I was in a relationship with a narcissist, and I didn't have the diagnosis at the time. And that was a very abusive relationship. And after that relationship, I was basically broken and shattered. And I was like, I need to go to therapy. I need to heal. And I need to take therapy seriously. And so I've been in therapy for about 2.5 years now. And just recently, my psych, who's a specialist, evaluated me, and she was like, you do meet the criteria for MPD, narcissistic personality disorder. And so that was a tough pill to swallow at first, because it was like the person who abused me also had the same diagnosis. And it was like, am I really that bad? But not everyone with the same disorder acts the same or behaves in the same way. And so that was something that I had to process and come to terms with.
Yeah, and I like that you said like really try in therapy, right? Because that's the only way that stuff is going to work. Is when we actually want to be there or try to be better, try to just figure out what's going on with us and what's wrong with
Yeah.
us.
I mean, a lot of people enter therapy thinking like, okay, if I go to therapy, everything will be better. But it's like you can't just go there for an hour a week and expect these magic changes to occur. You have to do the work outside of therapy too. You have to listen to what the therapist says and apply those skills and do that in motion in everyday life instead of just going for the hour talking to them and just saying, okay, I did it. That's not how it works. That's not how you get better.
No, and I agree with that 100%. Just like in my life, and I've been addicted to drugs and different things like that. And just being in those moments where I was just pleasing people and not really trying to work on myself. It was like, hey, I'll go to therapy for that 1 hour and then I'll leave and go get my dope and I'll be good. As opposed to the growth I saw when I like actually applied myself and got clean and went through all that.
Yep.
But just like curious with that disorder, was there like early memory, like one of the earlier things you can remember that you experienced that was like, oh, I feel
Yeah.
different because I'm either not reacting the same way or my perspective isn't as the same as everybody around me?
So I'd say it was late middle school-ish. My best friend's mom called my mom and it was like, "Your daughter is so mean to my kid all of the time, and she's constantly crying, and I don't know what to do anymore." And that happened a few times. Where like my friends' parents would like call my mom and be like, "I don't know what to do anymore. Like your child is being really mean," and I didn't understand. I didn't get it, and I would justify it. And my mom was like, "Oh, that doesn't sound like them," and but in reality, that's what I was doing. And so that pattern like happened very early on. I'd say as early as like 12. That's when I started being like mean. And it was a way of gaining control and trying to take back my power. And I thought that was how to do it. I felt like expressing vulnerability or love or positive emotions made me weak or a bad person. So instead, I tried to manipulate others and use fear to gain their affection and to gain their approval.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially at that young of an age of being like conscious and aware of trying to do that.
Yeah.
Did you were you feeling those things like deep down, like any type of like remorse, I guess? I don't know if that's the right word, but like, oh, I see the pain or the hurt, like, I just called my friend this or I just did that to my friend and I see that pain, but how did you process seeing that?
So one of the core parts of narcissism is entitlement and selfishness. So I knew I was hurting others and I like cognitively knew that, but my selfishness was just so like amplified that I didn't really care enough. I did feel some elements of remorse, but it was more so looking back in hindsight where I can feel it, but like during those moments I did not feel it. It was more just like the selfishness overrode that.
Yeah, and how did that kind of progress for you as you got older and you started to, I mean, obviously as we're growing up, we're learning more about ourselves, we're learning how to live, how we fit into the world and all that type of stuff. But how did that look for you in dealing with that and not being diagnosed with at that time with it?
Yeah, so it was this very volatile relationships, very short relationships where I was constantly just rotating people, whether they would leave me or I would leave them. It was just a lot of like unstable, chaotic, just messy arguments all of the time. Nothing ever physical, but it was always just emotionally and verbally and psychologically just a huge mess. And then when I got into my 20s, that's when it really started amping up because that was when I started getting into more romantic relationships. And I never cheated, but I did kind of sleep around a little bit. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that.
You're
But
good.
yeah. So I basically used that as my way to get validation from others, and so I did that, and I just kind of just left a trail of chaos and havoc, and I didn't care. And I a lot of my behaviors also stem from self-destruction, so a lot of mine are also internalized, where I do feel a lot of shame and inferiority. So there are different types of narcissists. A lot of people don't know that. They think of like a narcissist and think of someone like stereotypically like confident and like grandiose and just over the top. I'm not that at all. I'm actually rather shy, and at my core, I feel less than, I feel worthless, I feel inferior, and so a lot of my behaviors are things to try to make up for that and to try to compensate for that. So that's why I use like power and fear and like using different like unhealthy coping mechanisms to get that validation. So that's how it came out. It was a lot of self-destruction and a lot of just bad coping mechanisms amplified.
Yeah, and like having those feelings of, low self-esteem or self-worth, or, not feeling good enough, or, having those feelings deep down, and then they project out in those different ways. Was that something you had ever like saw help with early on or in that time? Or did you talk to people, like did you have like, somebody you could lean on and say like, hey, this is how I'm really feeling? Or was it all just like, oh, I gotta hide these by either these negative coping mechanisms or by the way I treated, other people?
So I never was quiet about the fact that I tended to play the victim. I tended to be very outwardly like open about the fact that I had all these bad coping mechanisms, and I would play it up and I would get sympathy from people. And I come from a family who was very mentally ill, and therefore they saw and witnessed all of my self-destructive coping mechanisms. And I've been in therapy in and out since I was 12 years old. But I was always good at masking with a psychologist. So I would put on like a happy face, and I would only be in there for a few months. And then they'd be like, you know what? It seems like you're doing better. So we're just going to like cut down your sessions. And eventually they just like not fired me, but they just said I was like healthy enough to not be as a client. So I was good at doing that, but I wasn't being honest with them. But yeah, I was always playing victim. I was never like trying to be like, oh, I have all these secret things I do that I don't want to show people. It was more so like, here are these things, and I am broken, and I wanted people to see that I was in pain. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, and I can relate to that in an aspect of like I kind of use that in my addiction as well to like gain that sympathy or manipulate people, right? Because I needed to do what I needed to either get high or or lie to
Yeah.
somebody, and keep that relationship or whatever it was. And so like I remember using that in processing that like that pain I was going through to then turn it into that manipulation, right? To convince people to gain that power dynamic of, oh, you gotta feel sorry for me or you gotta help me. And in reality, I was just doing that because I needed some money to go get high.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like interesting how we go through those things, and we don't, I guess, fully see it in the moment, but we understand what we're doing, and we become okay with it, or we not maybe not even okay with it, but we just keep doing it.
Yep.
Was there ever points where you were like that guilt or shame that you had mentioned shame? Did that ever like fully take over and just like, why do I keep doing this, or what, what's wrong with me, or like I'm this terrible person?
It was always more in a self-centered way where I felt like if someone like left me, my ego would get so bruised and I'd be like, wow, something really is wrong with me. And it was a lot about me, me, me. It was never about the other person. I didn't care about the other people. But if someone did something to bruise my ego, I was like, wow, I guess I am awful. But at the same time, me pushing people and doing all those tests, it did try to confirm my beliefs that I was bad and I was not good enough. So it was a self fulfilling prophecy essentially. But I didn't really start to feel that shame until I did start healing and going into therapy. And after that relationship with the narcissist who abused me, that was really when it was like a mirror being held up to me, essentially, that relationship. I was not as bad as that person as far as like the behaviors go, but I did treat people not very nicely. And it was like a mirror being like, this is what you do, and this is how you treat people, and this is how you make people feel. And so now you got to deal with it, and now you should heal. And so that's basically what I did. And that was where I started to feel a lot of the shame and the guilt. And I was like, wow, this is how I made people feel. Like, this really sucks. So,
Yeah, no, and I think that makes a lot of sense because we don't always feel in the moment, right? Because we don't fully understand the other side of it. So then that shame comes in when we start seeing that other side of it. Um, but being in a relationship with a narcissist before you were actually diagnosed, and you just said like holding up that mirror and seeing that, did you ever notice in that relationship like, oh shit, some of that is me? Or did you like see some signs of that in that person that was like, oh man,
yeah.
maybe I have that as well?
Yeah, I did feel this weird sense of connection, but they were a lot more Machiavellian than me, a lot more cunning. They basically were able to play like 5D chess essentially, where they were able to like scheme like ways like steps ahead. Very, very smart person. But some symptoms I was able to be like, this is very familiar. Why are we like this in this way? But they had the diagnosis, but they tried to like say that they didn't have it, that the doctor was wrong, that like they did the whole denial thing. And so at the time I was like, okay, I mean, I guess you're right. And so it wasn't until after the breakup where I was like, I mean, if they were diagnosed, that I mean, they had it. And a lot of narcissists kind of do it, not accept the diagnosis. They tend to say like, no, the doctor's wrong, I'm right. They don't know what they're talking about, because they don't want to face the shame and take accountability for it. So yeah.
Yeah, and noticing some of that, noticing some of those traits, and then just some of the other things you've been through in your life, and some of those experiences. Did you think you had like a disorder or mental health? Like, were you diagnosed with anything earlier, or did any of the therapists like point out stuff to you that you were like, oh, I do have like some mental battles and struggles I got to figure out?
Yeah, so most people with a personality disorder will have multiple other disorders. So I have depression, anxiety, and like I said, I was diagnosed with borderline in 2020, and that is like a sister disorder to narcissism. So like I had researched MPD extensively once I got my borderline diagnosis. So like I read into it and I was like, huh, that does kind of sound familiar. But my BPD was so severe at the time that like any symptoms of MPD that I did have, like it was kind of like dulled. It wasn't until my BPD was reduced where my psych was like, you know what, my BPD is now in remission. It's fully managed where it's like dormant now, but my MPD symptoms were still there, and that's when I got my diagnosis because my psych evaluated me and was like, you meet the criteria for this, and we need to talk about it, and it's that went from there.
Yeah, and like we just because like I've struggled with anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and that type of thing. Like when I was growing up, my parents put me in anger management because that's I guess either how it came out or how other people perceived it. And so I'm going for this problem that I knew inside of me that this wasn't actually what was like what I was going through and what I was dealing with. And so it was a really like conflicting thing. Like I felt like almost like I was being convinced that I was one way, but I knew deep down, like, at the time I didn't know what the word for depression was or anxiety was or like all those different feelings that I had. But it didn't feel like I needed anger management. It felt like I needed something different. So like what did you have that experience of like being told like it's this or that, but understanding or feeling like, oh, there's something like a little bit more I'm dealing with than just this
Yeah.
one thing.
Like, I did feel like I had those other diagnoses because I did. I met the criteria for them, but I did feel like there was something missing, there was something off, and it was like something they were not catching and they weren't seeing. So when I did get the MPD diagnosis, I was like, finally some clarity and some answers. But then it was also that like moment of like, oh wow, I have this disorder that a lot of people don't recover from or like go into remission from, and I have a very demonized label now tacked onto me for the rest of my life. So yeah.
Yeah. Like kind of just like you just mentioned of dealing with this for the rest of your life, right? Like
Mhm.
what is that thought process like for you of knowing this is what I have to do for the rest of my life? This is something I have to stay on top of, or it's going to, project itself in more negative ways. Like, how do you kind of approach that with that thought of that lifelong work that you have to put in?
It's extremely daunting, but at the same time, I told myself this is the deck of cards that I was dealt, and I can either make the best of it or I can lean into it. And leaning into it would just be me being my old self and not doing anything about it, or I can do something about it and go to therapy and continue to get better. Because with my BPD, when I did get diagnosed with borderline, I was clinically severe. And I am now like in remission for that. My symptoms are dormant. And with MPD, the remission rate is not as high. I don't expect to achieve remission for that, but I do expect, hopefully, my goal is to get to mild symptoms to where like I can still have a functional, happy life and it's not affecting me as much. Just from being in therapy these past few years, my cruelty and my manipulation and all that did reduce significantly. So that's good. But yeah, it is going to be a lifelong process of me constantly keeping myself in check and constantly doing the work. And that's scary, but it's also the cards I was dealt with. And therefore, I want to make the best of it and not just lean into it and say, for me, this is, like I can do something about it,
Yeah, and I love that mentality about it because like getting clean from drugs, it's that lifelong, thing of I can't even take a drink or I'm gonna end up back, doing heroin by myself in a dark room. Um
Mhm.
And I had this moment, about 6 months ago now, where I had stopped doing a lot of the stuff I was doing. And although I didn't relapse, I didn't use again, a lot of the behaviors kind of started to come back out. Like, and I started feeling that. And I just had to have that realization again of like, shit, I have to do this forever, or I'm not going to live that happier life, or that productive life. And so I really appreciate what you just said of like, yeah, it's daunting. It can be scary. It can be fearful. It can be a lot of different things. But if I want to make my life what I want to make it, it's that work that you have to put in.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has their own struggles too. Like people have chronic illnesses or people have other disorders that they're like battling. So it's like either you can, work on it and like or work against it. So it's like I chose to work towards healing instead of working towards, destruction and, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah, and definitely can relate to that aspect of it. When you were first diagnosed, like when you first like heard that, I
hmm.
know you kind of mentioned it earlier, but what was that? What was that like? Well, for one, did you know you were being tested in that moment, or you were being looked at for that, or was it kind of a surprise? And then, what was like that? That initial feeling towards what was just said.
So it was a bit of both. She had been evaluating me for months secretly, but didn't want to tell me because she didn't want that to like alter my behavior. But I was the one that brought it to her. I have a partner who actually has ASPD. I don't know if you know what that is, but that's the clinical term for sociopath. But he's been in therapy for years and years, and he's actually in the mental health field and has clients with MPD. And he came to me one day and was like, I see these traits in you. I think you might be a narcissist, and I want to talk to you about it. And he sent me this like long paragraph, and I was like, I want you to show this to your therapist. And like I said, he's in the field, he knows his stuff. And I was like, okay, I will. So I showed her, and my psych was like, all this checks out, I've been seeing that, and also I've been evaluating you, so I want to talk to you about this. And we went through all like the actual criteria for the disorder, and she told me like how I met it and like why. And so it was a mixture of like bringing it to her, but also the fact that she was already evaluating me was a little bit kind of shocking, but it made sense. She told me she started evaluating me last summer because there was a situation involving my family where I really should have been showing more remorse than I was, and I was acting very cold and callous. And that was when she was like, this seems a little strange. I'm going to start documenting this. And that was when she told me that was like her first moment.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Just like how your partner was able to kind of like see that and like bring that to you. And I'm just curious and go back into it, but like, did you feel any type of way about like your partner coming to you and saying that? Just because I feel like at least in the majority of relationships, if you went to your partner and said, hey, like I think you might be a narcissist, I don't know how they would appreciate that. So just like,
My
what was
first
your thoughts in that? Yeah.
So I didn't know he had ASPD at the time, but our disorders look very similar. So at first, my reaction was like, you know what? No, you're just projecting. I feel like you have it, and you're just saying that to me. And then I was like, actually took a moment to like let it sink in. I was like, you know what? What he's saying is true. I shouldn't just project that onto him. And so I just sat with it, and I was like, all right, I'm bringing this to my psych. But at first, I was like, no, it's all you. Like, what are you talking about? But yeah.
Yeah, just because I'm like, as you were saying that, I kind of thought like, oh, I wonder if I said that to, my wife, if she would just be like, oh yeah, no, probably, probably not.
Yeah.
But kind of going back to before you really sought therapy, and got that diagnosis. Would you say, I know you mentioned that moment that your therapist and you had talked about of in your family, and maybe she thought you should have had a different reaction, but is there like one big moment you can look at and say like my reaction was like really, really bad, and that's like where you realized you had to start doing some type of work for yourself because something really didn't feel right in that moment?
I think it was just little things compounded. Like I had a few exes reach out, or I reached out to them because like familiarity, and I wanted someone to talk to over the years, and I would reach out to them, and they would tell me how I put them in therapy or how I traumatized them, and how like they were still dealing with the repercussions of it. And I was like, oh, okay. And at the time, I was just like, you know what, they're overreacting, they're exaggerating. But in hindsight, now I get it. Um, but it was also just things like over time, I didn't feel guilt and remorse, like I said earlier on, but like over the years, I started to feel more guilt and more remorse as my behavior started to escalate. Like I broke up with someone once at their dad's funeral, like over text. Really shitty timing.
Yeah, maybe
um,
just a
and
little.
so like that was just like a moment where it was like I really shouldn't have done that. I could have waited a day or two. Um, but or just like purposely making someone upset right before they fell asleep because I wanted to make them not be able to sleep because I felt like power in that, and just different things like that, or people refuse to talk to me and cut me out of their life because of how badly I treated them. Just different things like that, like compounded, and eventually I was like, there's something off here. Why am I treating people like this? Why do I get satisfaction out of this? And this is not okay. Um, so there was no like big one moment, but it was just a bunch of little moments.
Yeah, and I think that's important, like to be able to look at those moments, right, and see like, oh, yeah, maybe that wasn't the best time to to send that text, which sounds like a really bad day, with that going on. But when you think about all those little moments, then that's a lot to start to take in, right? I just like getting clean and like starting to feel again. That first week, I was just getting this rush of like, oh my God, I did all this stuff and I felt all these feelings and this is way too much and so overwhelming. And like I was just breaking down and randomly,
Yeah.
and just because I couldn't handle the shame and guilt that was just pouring out and into me and into my mind. And that was because of a lot of things built up over a lot of years. And so, like for you, coming into that realization and then starting that process of like looking at some of those moments early on in your healing journey, did you have a experience like that where you just started realizing a lot of those little moments and some of that pain, or was it kind of more spread out as you continued in that healing process?
I think I always log those moments in the back of my mind, so they were kind of always there, and I was just allowing myself to confront them and acknowledge them. It's still hard for me to look back on those old situations and fully feel guilt, just because it feels like a totally different person than who I once was. It's like a past life almost. Whereas now, when I do hurt someone, I do actually feel guilt and remorse like right away, like instantly. So there's still this weird objective like cognitive dissonance there. But I still do feel bad about those moments and how I've hurt those people, just not in a way where it's still very empathetic. It's more of like intellectually, I understand that I hurt them and I do feel bad about that, but I can't fully empathize. Um, like I said, because it just feels like so night and day of who I used to be.
Yeah, and how does that feel for you? Looking at your growth, right, and looking at the person maybe you were to where you are today, and seeing that night and day. How do you kind of view that of those two like almost extremes of being really deep in this and doing it that way, and then now really facing it and really trying to grow and become a different person?
Yeah, I'm still extremely self-critical and I'm still always like convinced I'm not like making any progress. And so my psych all the time has to be like, no, you're doing XYZ and these are the things that you've done. And so I have to like really think about it. But when I do look back on it, it really is so much different. Cause like people from my past that still do talk to me say how different I am, how it is like a totally different person, how like they never would have expected me to turn out this way. And like they are proud of me and they're proud of my growth. So like people are seeing it. It's hard for me to sometimes even just distinguish it or even like understand it or comprehend it. But I mean, it was me, and like I did do those bad things, so I have to take accountability for it. And I can't like just push it off and be like, well, no, because it was me. But it's still a surreal feeling of just knowing I was capable of that, just because I could never really even do that now.
Yeah, do you ever get like, looking at that night and day, does it ever feel the like opposite of that? Like you were just in it yesterday, like maybe you're having a bad day or some of those thoughts are coming back into where you feel so close to it. It could be like frustrating, or it could be like, why do I feel that way even though I'm removed from it and I've been working on it for a period of time?
So I guess it's like this like dull sensation sometimes where like my defenses will flare up and I'll get these like random urges to like do those little behaviors. Like sometimes with my partner, if we don't really argue much, but if we do argue, sometimes like my inner defense will be like say something cruel, say something mean, like try to hurt him, like verbally. And I don't act on it, but just the impulse, like that random like impulse will like come up and I'll be like, whoa, haven't felt that in a while. That's strange. So like then I have to think about it and sit with it and be like, okay, why did that happen? And a lot of it is just old patterns and my trauma responses that I learned growing up and how I dealt with things. But I basically have to regulate myself and be like, no, we're not doing that, and have to soothe. Once in a while, it will slip up and it will resurface and something will happen, but I try to really keep it, contained these days.
Yeah, and with just that example of something, sometimes you slip up, right? Maybe something does come out in that response, because it's not always controllable. It can be really hard at times. What is the afterthought of it? Like, are you able to show yourself some self-compassion in that moment and just look at the growth you've had and realize, oh, this was a small mistake? Or are you pretty hard on yourself and beat up on yourself a little bit in those moments?
It's like the rational part of my brain fights with the irrational, because like the rational part is like, you don't really do these things anymore, so like you should be proud of yourself. The irrational part is like, wow, you haven't changed at all, and so like you're always going to be this person. And so I have to like kind of like get pulled to which side. Usually I try to go for the rational, but that doesn't always work. So it's just push and pull.
Yeah, and I asked that question because, like, I feel that at times where I've been working on myself for what feels like so long now, and then I do something that's like, oh, man, I haven't done that since like I was using, and why is this behavior coming out now? And so it, like you just said, it's kind of that inner battle, right? Of um, oh, I just messed up, and I've had this huge conflict since I got clean of, an inner like dialogue of, are you a bad person who's pretending to be good right now, or are you a
Yeah.
good person who made those mistakes throughout your life, and now you're making amends, or you're working on yourself, or however you want to put it. And
Yeah.
that's always been like the toughest inner conflict is, am I this bad person or am I this good person?
Yeah,
Like,
I feel that
you had
a
that
lot.
experience?
Yes. The bad person pretending to be good. Yeah, I think about that quite a lot.
How do you like view that, or have that inner dialogue yourself when that kind of comes up?
A lot of it is me thinking like maybe I tricked myself or trick people around me to think that I actually am better off than I actually am, and that within me are all these behaviors that I don't even realize I'm doing that are still manipulative and still maladaptive. And a lot of it is just self-compassion and self-talk and trying to like regulate myself and bring myself back down to baseline and be like, no, I know how I used to be. I am not like that person anymore. Especially because the way I know I'm not like how I used to be is because when certain situations arise, I would react a very different way than how I used to now, where it doesn't even cross my mind to be manipulative or cruel or mean. Whereas that was my first instinct before and my first thought, and I would immediately do it. And now it's like that doesn't even like it doesn't register. So like I know like I have different thought patterns and I view the world in different ways now. So I just have to remind myself of that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point of a way to look at yourself when through growth, right? And through that process is, oh, I don't have that same reaction right away. Or like maybe that thought comes up of like, oh, I want to do this, but I don't act on that behavior. And I think that's
Yeah.
what shows that growth. And that's where we can realize, okay, yeah, I am really trying, and I'm not just pretending.
Yeah.
Just because it can be such a inner battle when
Hmm.
you're dealing with that. So just kind of like as you start navigating this discover or this healing process, right? Of like really working on this. What have been some of the like moments that you have seen that have brought you like real growth? Like an example of a time you had a different reaction and you were just like, oh, like that was awesome because I didn't hurt this person in that moment and I didn't manipulate that person. What
Yeah.
have those experiences been like for you?
So about a month in meeting my partner, he was telling me about some of the stuff he's gone through in his childhood, which was pretty bad stuff. And in that moment, my first thought was, I need to be gentle with this person. And I never would have thought that before. Like the old me, I would have exploited that and I would have used that against him. But my first thought was, wow, like he's been through so much. I really need to be gentle with him. And that was a huge like whoa moment, like after the fact, where it was like, because before I was never able to show vulnerability or positive emotions. I was not able to even express like that vulnerable, like, wow, I can't believe you've been through that, and like trying to like reciprocate and be understanding. I wasn't able to do that before, or even show gentleness. Whereas now I really try to be gentle with him, and I still try to. And yeah, so that was a huge, like, big moment for me.
That's really it was really powerful just to hear you say that. And like I say that because when I think of narcissism, it's almost like a society viewpoint, because I haven't like had too many interactions with a narcissist, or like really looked into it too much myself. So it's almost like, I see these different things, and then the one thing I don't think about is a narcissist responding with, I need to be gentle with this person. And really like hearing that genuinity in your voice of like, no, this is how I see that, and this is how I need to behave, because this is something they've been through.
Yeah, and it wasn't like
Go ahead.
it wasn't like performative either. It wasn't like, okay, I think I really need to be gentle with them because that's the right thing to do. But it was more like a sincere, like empathetic, like genuineness of like, wow, I really want to like treat this person with care. So like that was like huge for me.
Yeah, and that's what I meant by that. You could hear that in your voice of like real sincerity and genuineness behind it, not just like to put on that front of like, oh yeah, I need to be nice.
Yeah.
But like, has that been like frustrating for you in this healing process of like the aspect of, this is what people see narcissism as, or this is what people view it as, and yet I'm like working on myself, I'm trying to heal, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, like especially with something like this and it being such a trendy topic right now.
Yeah.
What is your like response, viewpoint, feelings kind of towards being you in today's society with that topic going on?
I really don't get much of that in person at all. People just view me as me and they interact with me in like a normal way. But online, it's a whole other story where any video I post, they'll view it from a negative angle. If it's a video of me talking about therapy, they'll say I am weaponizing it and it's all like a ploy. If I talk about the old behaviors I've done, people will call me evil. If I post a cute video with my partner, they'll say it's staged and it's fake. If I post a video talking about the relationship problems we've had, they'll say that it's toxic and that we're abusing each other. I get like death threats like daily, just to people like saying how like I will never change, I'm evil, I'm demonic, and all of these things, and how like I should just give up because like narcissists can't change, and like this whole big rhetoric that people are projecting because they don't know me. They don't know me based off a minute video, but it still gets to me because it's still like I'm a person and you're treating me as if I'm like some subhuman. And the fact that people can even like come on there and then just say those things so like boldly, it's just I boggles my mind. Like I would never say that to anyone, like, and yet they feel like they can, because I'm a narcissist, so they feel like they're entitled to.
Yeah, does that like, how do you process those like comments or those words? Because I let not so much online, but like I've dealt with different situations where people found out I was a recovering addict and have had different things said to me or different things said about me. And it would be hard at times, but obviously when you work on yourself, you kind of gain some like confidence and being able like, okay, yeah, not all people are going to accept me. Um, so how do you kind of deal with that, like and like go through that part of your journey?
So I was diagnosed and then pretty much right away started documenting it on the internet because I've been a mental health creator for years. So like I in real time, like I was processing my diagnosis while like getting people's like hate comments at the same time. So it was this whole big identity crisis of like, I have this new diagnosis, and then people being like, well, you're never going to change, you're evil, you're awful. And it was like, wow. So like for like a month and a half, I fell into like a deep depression of like, yeah, people just, it's true, like I'm never gonna get better and I'm this awful person. Nowadays, I am getting a lot more positivity of people being like, hey, you really have changed my outlook on MPD, or like, wow, I have a MPD relative and like this really has made me understand how they think. And like I get a lot of positive like stuff too. But I'm trying to like not internalize the hate comments as much. They still do get to me if like I get bombarded with them, but I mean, it's never an easy pill to swallow getting told like really like cruel things like that. But I'm trying to objectively look at it as like, okay, this person obviously has been hurt by a narcissist, whether they actually were diagnosed or not, doesn't matter. They were hurt by someone and they're projecting all of that onto me, and that's not my fault. They don't know me. So I have to look at it in that lens.
Yeah, and that's excuse me. I think that shows a lot of strength. Like, do you, especially the way you just explain it, like getting diagnosed and then like putting that on right away, right? Like that's a really vulnerable thing to do, and hard, because then maybe some other people that didn't know that about you are like, oh, that's why they did that, or this is why they did that. And I'm just thinking, because like I can think of some of that happening in early recovery for me, and people really finding out like, oh, he was on drugs. um
Mhm.
but like, do you see the strength in yourself and give yourself credit for being able to put yourself in such a vulnerable position to to show other people like this is kind of what it's like, and this is, whether it's inspiration, whether it's hope, whether it's changing a perspective. Do you see that strength in yourself and being able to do that?
I guess I don't even view it in that lens, and my partner and my therapist both kind of have to tell me that at times. I see it more as like a I mean, I do see it as a way to help keep myself accountable, but I don't really see it as like me being this like beacon of like inspiration. I tend to be more self-critical, usually about everything in regards to my life. That's where a lot of like the crux of my NPD stems from, is this like inferiority and feeling like bad. So like that's where a lot of that still like stems from and still like internalizes, is from there in that place. And where a lot of my behaviors are still based around. So like I have to like come out of that and like look at it objectively, and I don't know, not internalize it as much, but also just know that I don't know, that's a good question. I don't really have a good answer to that because I still don't really know.
Yeah, no, I appreciate your honesty in that, and like just being real with that fact of like still kind of processing that, right? And I
Mhm.
think, I see it. That's the way I see it, because like I said, it was just seeing some of the messaging, and seeing some of your people's comments that people leave on your post.
Yeah.
um to be so vulnerable, especially in today's world, and to put that out there, especially then on a, not only just being vulnerable, but then on a topic that social media is kind of like obsessed with right now, and
Yeah.
and pointing that out, but from a whole different perspective. And so I think that does take it takes a lot of strength to be able to put yourself in such a vulnerable place to, whether, I'm not sure you see it that way, but I think it does inspire a lot of hope, because even just with talking to you, I don't even think you have to be, a diagnosed narcissist to find hope in what you post, because it's, if you take out the difference, like, if I took out the difference of me being an addict and you being a narcissist, and I just look at some of your messaging, I can relate to some
Mhm.
of that. I can find hope in some of that. So I don't even think it just necessarily has to be that aspect of it. Um,
Yeah.
so I think that's really powerful, and a really cool thing that you do with that. And besides like the healing part of it, and I like that you said there's some accountability there, right? When you're like showing the world what you're doing. um do you want to challenge that perspective of narcissism through your messaging, and the way it's kind of viewed, treated, or handled? Or is that kind of like maybe just something that's happening because of what you're doing?
No, I definitely want to help fight the stigma in any way that I can. If I can even change one person's mind about NPD to make people realize that like not every narcissist is this evil, awful creature, then that's great. Because I don't like the stigma. I don't like getting this diagnosis and being like seeing all these like resources online, being told how like awful and bad I am, that I'm never going to change. So like I want to actively heal for myself because off camera I am putting in the work. I am going to therapy. I am doing all of the coping skills. I'm reading up on narcissism. I'm doing all of that. I'm doing the work. And then on camera I'm making videos trying to like help inform people. So like I'm not just I'm walking the walk, I guess, like so I'm not just like spouting a narrative, but I'm also behind the scenes actually putting the work in. So I'm trying to like show people it is possible.
Yeah, and I think like just I guess I don't associate that narcissism with the vulnerability that you show, and I think that right there just shows work in it of itself is that
Yeah.
vulnerability and to be able to put yourself there, and then just kind of like because of a big part of that social media phase about it is about relationships, right? That's where I think I see the majority of it is like just sometimes post after post of like, oh, you were with a narcissist, or this is what you experienced.
Mhm.
How is it? And I guess this adds another dynamic to it. But how is your relationship, if you don't mind, just hitting on it a little bit with you said a diagnosed sociopath? Is that
Yeah.
okay? How is like that dynamic in the how you have to like deal with that and understand like there's some complexities there, I'm sure, with growing together as a partnership.
I mean, as someone who does advocate for like the destigmatization of mental disorders, I will say that I was wary when he told me his diagnosis, just because one of the criteria for his diagnosis is lying and manipulating others. So, in the back of my mind, for the first few months, I was like, is this all a ploy? Is this manipulation? And like, so I did have those internalized biases there, and I had to wait to like see the compassion, let those walls break down, and realize that like no, like at least from what I've seen, he is being genuine. He's been kind. He's been in therapy for years. If neither of us had been in therapy, it probably would not have worked. It would have crashed and burned because our disorders would have clashed, and we would not have been good for each other at all. But we're both in therapy. We're both working on ourselves. But yeah, our relationship does look different probably than the average person's, but I think in some ways it almost is healthier because we are in therapy and because we hold each other accountable. We don't enable each other. If either of us like has symptoms resurface, we call each other out immediately. We're like, no, we're not doing that. We're going to talk about it and we're going to find ways to work on it and solutions to make this not happen again. So we do a lot of like tough, like honest conversations and just holding each other accountable and ourselves accountable. So
Yeah, and I really appreciate that you said it might even be healthier, because I like being in therapy and putting in the work. Like I really do think that's where we have better relationships is when we're constantly working on ourselves and trying to figure out how we can better live our lives to be happy and successful, and whatever those two words mean to us. Obviously it looks different for everybody, but when you do that, I feel like you do have better and healthier relationships. So when you have two people that have that separate working on themselves and then you
mhm.
bring it together, like I would agree probably that
Yeah,
aspect, just that aspect of alone of it, adds to a healthier relationship and can build a healthier relationship.
yeah.
um yeah, is that something you share a whole lot about, in your in like sharing your posts? Do you talk a lot about being in a relationship as a narcissist?
Yeah, he makes his own content and videos about his disorder, and we sometimes make videos together talking about it. Of course, whenever we do make a video about it, people don't believe us, but they don't know us. So, like, a narcissist and a sociopath, sure, people can make whatever presumptions they want. I mean, even a few years ago, if you asked me that, I probably would have been like, "Oh, that sounds like a disaster." But now that like I'm the like actual person in the dynamic and I know how we are and how we operate, it's like no, it's actually very healthy, ironically. So yeah. I mean, we're not perfect. We have our problems just like any other couple does. But we also can relate to each other on a more deeper level because we have similar disorders and we don't meet each other with judgment. Like, so we do have like some difficulty with empathy. That's how our disorders operate. We don't like have as much empathy as the average person does. So like we can say something and we would know we won't judge each other. Again, we don't enable, but we also meet each other with a place of understanding and acceptance. So It's just like give and take of like, okay, I accept you, but I also want to make sure that you're working on yourself too, so that we can have a healthy, productive relationship.
That, I mean, honestly sounds like perfect advice for anybody in a relationship, any type of relationship with any person. Just the way, you talked about that understanding,
Mhm.
meeting each other in the middle at times, yeah, understanding where some flaws may be as well as some strengths. And then that last part of you're working on yourself, I'm working on myself, you have a life, I have a life.
Yep.
That's what creates a good relationship, is when you bring two lives together but still have those lives, and then you have that one together as well. So I like that a lot, as well. So like in this healing process for you, and what has been one of the biggest things that you have found to do, and to like whether it might be like journaling, or maybe it is the videos that you make, but what has been like one of the biggest aspects of your healing journey that has brought you the most growth, or brought you the most um positive feelings as you do it?
I would say self-reflection, and that comes in many forms. It can become like in the form of journaling, and that was when it originally started. But it also sometimes I just sit with my emotions. I feel the emotion, I let it pass through, and I don't act on it. I don't like act on impulse, and I'll just let it just pass through my body. Or I do a type of therapy called somatic therapy, where like I can try to like my therapist guides me on like where the emotion is coming from and like why in my body it's pent up in that way. Like our bodies hold emotion. That's why like when we're tense, our neck like hurts and stuff like that. So we try to like see like where it's coming from and where the source is. And a lot of that is helpful with meditation and like yoga and just different spiritual practices. So just different ways of showing myself compassion and gratitude and giving myself the grace to be like, we don't have to act on this. We can actually just sit with it and just allow myself to sit with the discomfort, because the discomfort's not going to kill me. I can sit with it and just let it pass through.
Mm. I really like that. I like the way you worded that. So have you found anything that like you tried and was like, oh yeah, this doesn't work for me, or have you just like been able to make things work with how you do it?
I haven't found anything that was like, oh wow, totally not off the table, but like I have found things that work more for me, just like journaling and meditation were two big ones. Reading self-help books I really liked. So just it's less about things that don't work for me, but more so when I do find something that does work, I tend to like gravitate towards that. So
Yeah, and then it shows that in a healing journey, like try all these different things, right? Like you didn't
yeah.
just say, "Oh yeah, I only do therapy," or "I only
Mhm.
do this." Like you just listed off like 10 different things that are part of
Yeah.
your healing journey. And I think that's the biggest part of it, is it doesn't mean one thing's going to work. And even if one thing is working, that doesn't mean you can't add in these different things. So that way, not only are you working on your feelings, but you're working on how to express those. You're working on your behaviors. You're working on how to treat other people. You're working on how to react in social situations. Like when you add in all those dynamics, I think is really important with that healing journey, because then you take all those different things from it. Or you also, like, if something stops working or something's not going to work in that moment, you have something else to fall back on, instead of feeling like, I failed, I messed up, now I just gotta relapse back into those old thoughts.
Yeah, you need a cocktail of just well-rounded supplemental things for your old behaviors, because your old behaviors, once you take them out, there's an empty space there. And you need to fill that with like a good hobby, a healthy one, an interest of yours that you find that you enjoy, a coping mechanism. Because if it's empty, that bad behavior will continue to fall back in there because you don't know what else to do. You don't, that's all you know. So you have to supplement that. And then the more things you supplement, those bad behaviors tend to lessen and lessen.
Yeah, that's a perfect way of putting a cocktail of of things. I like that.
Yeah.
So like just with where you're at today, and with that, being kind of early in that healing process from being that diagnosis, and all that type of things, where do you want to get to? Like what would be an ideal place for you to be able to get to, or what's like a goal that you have that you want to reach, in going through this healing process, whether that's for yourself or whether that's for what you put out there?
So clinically, I would like my symptoms to be reduced to mild, but as far as my own personal development goes, I would like to eventually get to a place where I feel safe in my own body or in my own environment, because that's always been one of my biggest issues, and that's where my narcissism developed from, was this feeling of unsafety and mixed with the inferiority and stuff. But just I've always felt unsafe in my own body, felt unsafe in the world around me. So therefore, if I ever reach a place where I do feel safe and I do feel secure and I do feel calm, that's where I want to get to.
Can you just go into that word safe a little bit? Like what would that look like, I guess?
I'm always on this like hypervigilance mode where everything's a competition, everything's a threat, everything's out to get me. I always have to outdo whatever I do because nothing's ever good enough. And I'm always feeling this chronic emptiness of feeling inferior, feeling worthless. And if I don't harp on something, then I'll have anxiety about something because I'm constantly need to be worrying about something. Something always has to be wrong because that's innately how I was like taught or whatever. My nervous system like was use that as a way to cope. And so I want to get to a place where my nervous system can regulate and actually feel safe within myself and around me.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Yeah, no, it does, and that's why I wanted to know, like, pick your brain a little bit about what you meant by that word
Yeah.
safe. So as we get kind of close to wrapping up, I just want to ask you, like, with where you're at and what you're working on and how you're working on it. Are you more comfortable like where you're at now and being the person you are, or like were you more comfortable back then when you were just expressing those emotions, having those behaviors, and this is kind of more uncomfortable for you, but you see the benefit obviously in being uncomfortable?
Back then, I think I liked the narrative of being sick and broken, but I also was in a lot of emotional pain too, because upholding all of those negative beliefs and turning that onto other people, that wasn't fun and it wasn't healthy or productive. And it's hard for me to even like go back to that mindset and even think about how I was back then. But like, I know I wasn't happy. I was miserable. So now it's a different type of discomfort, but it's one that's going to lead me to a healthier place. And it's one that's going to actually benefit me instead of keeping me stuck and stagnant. So I prefer this version of discomfort opposed to the old one.
Yeah, I love that. That's a great response to that. So yeah, again, I think this has been a really awesome like just experience. Just I mean, just for me personally, about hearing some of that dynamic. And again, obviously your experiences are with that disorder, but coming from somebody else who has a substance use disorder and those some different things with it. I think your words can be really inspiring just about that growth, just about healing, just about getting through some of those challenges, or overcoming some of that stigma that we face when we're vulnerable about things and opening up about things. So I really appreciate what you do and how you do it,
Thank you.
because it comes from a place of real vulnerability and just that sincerity in behind what you're doing and how you're talking.
Mhm.
So I just want to say, I appreciate that and I appreciate your time. And for anybody viewing, and put Kylie's links in the description, so definitely go check them out and see the messaging, because it really is just powerful and really cool stuff. And I would like to give you that last kind of word, whether it's a piece of advice, whether it's talking about something you're doing, whether it's some type of change or challenge in that perspective of narcissism. But like, I just kind of want to give you that opportunity for that last bit of our conversation today.
The last word about narcissism. Oh, I don't know. I guess just in general to challenge your preconceptions about it. To because the internet has such a buzzword of it and it's such a fad and such a trend, to look outside the lens of that and realize that narcissists are people. Anyone with a disorder is still a person who has thoughts and emotions and feelings just like you do, and we're not all the same. We don't act all the same. And just because you were abused by someone who was a narcissist doesn't mean that every narcissist abuses them. So yeah.
Huh? Well, awesome. Thank you again, Kylie. Again, I really
Thank
appreciate your time and coming on and sharing your experience
thank you.
and providing some hope, not even just with what you can relate to, but also just anybody dealing with a challenge or a disorder. in their life and putting in that work to overcome it and change that.
Mhm.
So thank you again for joining me. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep. So this has been Illuminate, Navigate, Radiate. Have a great rest of your day.